Okay, good afternoon. So we're going to have, it's more of an informal conversation. I think contemporary anti-Semitism and the BDS movement is not just some abstract thing. It affects the lives of, I think it affects the university as a whole and campus life as a whole, but it also affects the lives of faculty and of students. And this is, I don't know the stories of everybody here, but everybody agreed to be on the panel. So I think we're going to have sort of an informal conversation about the experiences that we've had in terms of anti-Semitism as students and anti-Semitism as faculty. And so I think we'll hear some personal experiences, and I think at the same time it would be good to have a conversation and try to put things maybe more in context and not just have a session where we're complaining, but a session where we're sharing our stories and trying maybe to relate to the kind of the issues that we've discussed more at a scholarly level. So I'm going to start at this end of the platform, and just for a few minutes, why did you agree to be on this panel, and how does this issue touch you?
Hi there. How does this issue touch me? My personal experience with anti-Semitism in terms of university campuses, I feel like started with my older brothers because they were both part of a group called Hasbara, which is an Israel advocacy group. One of them was the president. They were very involved, and at the time, the university that they went to and then I would later go to, York University, it was a very heated issue, BDS, these kinds of fights, and there would be people I would see like screaming back and forth in the hallways, about Israel, about these issues. And then when I got to university, part of me didn't want to join these groups because I was watching it growing up. It was like, it was hard to see where we were making ground and where we were covering ground, because it almost seemed like these two groups were never going to agree on anything and they were always just fighting. Personally speaking, I had seen, like walking through the campus, I'd had one or two friends who had like been spit on for wearing an IDF shirt. I went to some Hasbara things. I saw people screaming at each other across the room. But specifically, I hadn't experienced any direct anti-Semitism towards me. It was more of the culture and the environment that was around, and it was very much centered, not so much, not exactly anti-Semitism. Nobody, I think, was very outwardly hated Jews, but it was all about Israel and what Israel was doing and their policies and things and the settlements and the occupation, and those were the kinds of things that got brought up.
I think I have a little bit of a different experience because I haven't done a, regular study. I actually was in fashion school. And you think that in that kind of environment you don't really encounter this kind of political or situation, I would say. But then once we were thinking of different photo shoots, it used to be photo shoots and fashion shows, and we were thinking for different themes that we would use, and one girl basically straight out said that she wanted to do one on Nazis, and I was a little bit shocked because you really don't expect it in that kind of environment. And I think that really made me realize how anti-Semitism can really sweep through all parts, both of the university and all of society as a whole. We always think that it's on the university campuses that do political sciences or those kind of subjects, but really, even in the arts, there is very much a feeling that that is the general tone. When we talk about anything political, it's always anti-Israel. And it was interesting to have a conversation with different students on that they don't really study those subjects, but then they would, by default, really take that side of the story, because then obviously I started discussing, I don't think that's really appropriate. And actually, it was just as a little side note, actually, there was a Nigerian girl in my class, and she was the one who right away said that was very wrong to say. So that was just, there's always something positive, I think, in that. And on another note, I think in general, as someone who's been studying in Europe, I have to say that it is quite clear. And it's all of my friends that are Jewish have encountered anti-Semitism in one way or another on campus. And I know it's different than in the US, maybe the way that people perceive it, but it is definitely very, very much there.
Thank you. A lot of you know my story, but some who don't. So I was born in Iran, and I had to escape. My family had to escape, and about 80,000 Jews had to escape once the Islamic Revolution was happening, which turned Iran from a secular monarchy to an Islamic theocracy. And so I was basically born into this concept of anti-Semitism, but then we escaped to Los Angeles, and it has the second largest Jewish community in America, so I didn't really feel it until I went to UC Berkeley, where in the 90s it was a hotbed of anti-Israel. BDS didn't exist then as we know it today, but I remember taking a lot of Middle Eastern history courses and seeing a lot of my Middle Eastern history professors praise Khomeini, the man that my family just escaped from, who, you know, the country that took everything from us, and also would be constantly out on Sproul Hall, which is the center of our university, with, these are our professors holding signs that had a Jewish star equals a swastika. And as a college student in a school of 35,000 people, you had no idea what to do. So I would just see it and just kind of cry and feel really uncomfortable being in class. I never spoke up. I ended up then getting my PhD in religious studies, becoming a professor, and I taught at a university for 9 years where I was a very popular professor, teaching a lot of great classes, had a great group of students, and my Jewish students would come to me crying all the time because a certain professor teaching about the Middle East would constantly say negative things about Israel, as if Israel does not have a right to exist, not criticizing the Israeli government, but Israel as an apartheid state, etc. And they said, you need to help us, you need to do something. And I said, the irony is that I'm a visiting professor. You guys pay $50,000 a year at the school. You actually, as students, have more power than I do. But I then went to one of the tenured professors, and she said, we're gonna raise money, and you're gonna teach, can you teach a course on modern Israel? And I said, absolutely. And the specific professor who was teaching, you know, in the Middle Eastern History Department made sure that my course never came into the history department. She did not want a different perspective being taught on Israel. So luckily a poli-sci professor, the chair said, come teach your course in my class. And of course, being an unbiased professor in an academic setting, I taught both perspectives. I actually invited that one professor to come into my class and teach about her family being from a Palestinian village and what happened to her family. And I said, I'm trying to be very careful and not use her name. And I said to her, I hope you will invite me into your Middle Eastern history course to talk about what has happened to my family in Iran, because we have a very similar story, and I could talk about what has happened to Jews in Egypt, Libya, Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, and she never did. She never extended that invitation to me. Her story was allowed to be told in my class. My story was never allowed to be told. From what I understand, the way she teaches about the Middle East, religious minorities do not exist there. It's either Sunnis, Shias, or secular Muslims, and that's it. Never, she doesn't even talk about what religious minorities deal with and the persecution they deal with. So she starts writing articles in the school newspaper referring to Israel as an apartheid state, etc. And the tenured professors who are pro-Israel, meaning acknowledge Israel's right to exist at this point, said, can you write articles refuting it? Honestly, at the end of the day, you know more than all of us. And I said, absolutely. So that was one of the biggest mistakes we made, was that I actually wrote the articles refuting it. What I should have done is written it and had one of the tenured professors sign their name. Because what happened was that this professor who has tenure, her husband who has tenure, and all the pro-BDS professors basically made sure I never taught at this university again. And I didn't. They wouldn't give me another class. But when one door closes, another opens, and then I ended up at UCLA, which is a hotbed for SJP, BDS, but there's also a very strong Jewish community, a lot of support for the Jewish community. And while I was at UCLA, sorry, is this taking too long? Sorry, while I was at UCLA, I was very honored. They said to me, a human rights, I don't know if I should use her name, a woman from Iran who is a human rights advocate for women and children is coming to Los Angeles. She lived in Iran. She was a lawyer in Iran. She actually supported Ayatollah Khomeini, as a lot of people did. And once they really saw who Khomeini was, she then decided not to support him and advocate on behalf of women and children in Iran. And what happened was that the government came and imprisoned her. She ends up getting breast cancer, and the EU convinces the Iranian regime to let her come out and get treatment, and she did, but meanwhile they went and arrested her husband, and he committed suicide in jail. So they said, she's coming to UCLA, do you want to interview her? Do you want to moderate? And I said, absolutely, this is such an honor. So this was a couple years ago, I didn't even think about it. I put it up on Facebook, I put it up on Instagram, I didn't hashtag, I didn't do any of that. And at that point it was open, and I look at my phone as I'm lecturing, and I just see it like nonstop text messages, and my sister, my friends, everyone kept saying, take this off, take this off, take this off. And I looked at my Instagram, and I had 300 comments from men in the Gulf, men in Iran, basically threats of killing me, raping me, Zionist whore, she's a Zionist whore, she's not even Jewish. So all of these comments, so I quickly had to take it off, and then I quickly had to take myself off social media in terms of anything that I teach. ISGAP found me because there was a lecture online that was still up, and you guys found me that way, which was so wonderful that I ended up here, but at the same time I was bummed, because I was like, oh my gosh, I thought I took everything off, which showed me that I didn't. But that's what I deal with. Now the beauty is I now teach, as I think all of you know, I'm a lecturer, so I don't teach full time anymore, and I work at the American Jewish Community, a nonpartisan human rights, Jewish human rights organization that we fight on behalf of the Jewish community on all human rights. So I have job security, and the beauty of having job security and not caring about tenure track anymore is that I am very vocal now on campus, and I tell all of my Jewish students, my pro-Israel students, I tell all of my students, but I specifically tell my pro-Israel students, if you feel like you're being bullied by a professor or a student, but specifically a professor, let me know and I will cause hell. And it is really important for them to know that they have an ally, and not only do they have an ally who works at a Jewish human rights organization that has 22 offices in America and 10 abroad, and has been around for 112 years and does well financially, that we could cause hell. So it really is important for the students to have that type of ally on campus, because I don't care about tenure anymore. I'm not in that game. I teach because I love to teach, but more importantly, I'm there to be advocates for students against professors who bully them. Because if worst comes to worst, they fire me, there's 20 other universities I could be an adjunct professor at. So it has given me the opportunity to really, really be able to speak and advocate on behalf of the pro-Israel students. And what does that even mean? It means they believe that Israel has a right to exist. That's really what it just comes down to. Okay, thank you.
So my experience is a bit different. I've been teaching a class on Israeli politics and the Arab-Israeli conflict for 11 years without incident. My class is routinely full of students, sometimes oversubscribed, and people seem to like it. So there's never been a complaint, a problem, or an issue with that class, with any of the other classes that are offered at my university on things like the Holocaust or Jewish literature, any of those sorts of things. It simply has not been an issue. I have students in my class who run the full range of the political spectrum in the United States and who are of all sorts of different faith backgrounds. Has not been an issue for all of that time. Continues, as far as I can tell, and as far as I hope, not to be an issue. On the other hand, over the last, I would say approximately 3 years, the situation on our campus and in our state has gotten a little bit more tense, and there have been a variety of incidents that are undeniably anti-Semitic, and these incidents are arising from the kind of shift in the country, in the United States, and in, at least from my perspective, a kind of rising tide of what I would call white nationalism. And we have on our campus, but also on campuses that fall under the same university system, we have had numerous incidents with students who identify as white nationalists. And so this has led to all sorts of things like swastikas showing up on walls, white supremacist literature being distributed on campus, but also left in neighborhoods in what are called little free libraries. We've had groups that unfurl Nazi banners off of bridges on the interstate system. And on our campus, I think the kind of the biggest, most obvious case was that we had a student who participated in the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, and drove out there from quite far away. It's a long drive to participate in that rally, and came back and was quite active online, making a variety of what we would call non-specific threats. So not about doing anything in particular to particular people, but broadly language that would generally be seen as threatening to various minority communities on our campus and in the city, right? And so it wasn't simply signaling about Jewish people, although there was certainly some of that, but also about the African American community on our campus. And I think the noteworthy thing about this, if I'm going to kind of draw attention to it, was that the entire campus community really rallied together in response, right? So having this be a big issue in the news really led to the campus taking sort of a strong affirmative response in terms of support for the communities that were being targeted. And there was a rally on campus, and a lot of attention drawn to the issue. That was the first incident really on our campus. We also we later discovered there were additional white nationalist students who were on our campus, including a former student of mine who was, I guess the phrase is doxxed, publicly identified when a bunch of a message board, a white supremacist message board, was hacked and then published. And so some of the messages were traced back to him, including messages that seemed to be referring to me. The guess was that it was referring to me because he spoke about his professor, and professor was in echoes, which is of course a code for Jewish. So again, these are relatively kind of I guess relatively minor incidents, but the big thing that it pointed to was just the fact that not just that these folks exist, but also that they're not sort of single individuals who are behaving badly, but in fact that there is seemingly a kind of involvement in the right-wing community, and not the far right, but that people who espouse these ideas are really interested in getting connected or getting more involved with campus groups. So you find that what some of these students have been doing is working on gaining admission to things like innocuous groups, I would say, like the college Republicans, and working within those groups to then find other opportunities where they can share the much more radical, much more harmful position that they hold. And unfortunately in our state, they've become quite good at this. So that in the case of my former student, he was actually, he became very, very involved with conservative politics, not just on our campus, but statewide. Even to the point that he was hired to work for the re-election campaign of our governor. And he spent 8 months working as a paid staffer for the governor of our state. So there is this idea, and these groups have talked about it quite a lot online, we see, that they believe that there's fertile ground amongst these kind of everyday, regular conservative groups on campus where they can go and they can recruit. And this is, at least, again, from where I live, a very, very serious concern in a way that I think we need to kind of pay attention because really, There's undeniably anti-Semitism from these groups. They're built on it. These students absolutely have the position that Jews should all leave the United States or should be done away with, that they should go back where they come from, or they should go to Israel. These are positions that they hold. But they also, they don't simply target Jews, right? They're targeting the Muslims on our campus, they're targeting the Latinos on our campus, they're targeting African Americans on our campus, and they're not picking and choosing who they don't like. They don't like everybody who's not them.
My first experience of campus anti-Semitism was actually in middle school, although we were focusing on college campuses, of course. I was kind of strange in the fact that I went to a majority Jewish public school, and we had a basketball game against a school from another county that was majority non-Jewish, majority white, majority non-Jewish. And as our team was beating that team very badly, I don't remember the score, but it was very uneven, our school, our fans in the bleachers started cheering, "Heat up the buses, heat up the buses." And the kids from the other school, in response to that cheer, started cheering, "Heat up the ovens, heat up the ovens." So that was in middle school. I was fairly sheltered growing up in a very Jewish environment, and that was kind of a shock. And college was better. I went to a small liberal arts school, which was minority Jewish, as most places are, but had a thriving Jewish life. I had a lot of Jewish friends, and we had non-Jews going to Shabbat dinners and everything. And I've been trying to organize my thoughts about this, and I guess I would describe the three forms of anti-Semitism that I encountered as erasure, kind of political litmus testing, and just interpersonal interactions that involved anti-Semitism. So I'll try to be brief. As for erasure, I think we have people here who study I think Stephen used the word absencing, the absencing of the Jewish intellectual tradition from Western thought and from the academy. I took a course about Jews in America. It was called Jewish America, where I learned about the foundational role that a lot of Jewish women played in the American feminist movement and a lot of other leftist movements. But when I took a class, the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies 101 class, which of course covered those same topics, there was no mention of Jewish women. There was no, as intersectional as the class tried to be, there was no mention of Jews really throughout the course. And that's just an example I'll give of that kind of erasure. As for the political litmus testing, it felt, although I didn't go to a school that was as politically active as other schools of that type tend to be, there was still a feeling that every Jewish demonstration was either met with, well, it depended on the demonstration actually, so I'll give two examples. One would be the Holocaust Remembrance Day, where we would read, I would participate, coming from a family of Holocaust survivors, I would participate in reading the names of victims of the Holocaust. Only Jewish students really participated in this activity or really paid attention. And for me, that absence was kind of deafening from other people not to care. And the same people I would have wanted to care were out there protesting when Jews would be celebrating the Independence Day of the State of Israel with a barbecue. They would be out there with signs, signs about the oppression, the apartheid in Palestine. And I couldn't help but wonder when, for people so concerned about other people's lives, where the disconnect was, why we didn't matter too. And that was hard. And then on an interpersonal level, to get to my kind of third category, it was just kind of pervasive comments you would get. To address the political litmus testing. When it came to those political spaces, when I say political litmus testing, it felt like you kind of had to prove, are you a good Jew or a bad Jew? And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that experience. The third thing I wanted to talk about was the interpersonal, and that was just kind of microaggressions from people. Why don't you have a Jew nose? I've told a lot of people here, I had a friend ask me if Jews are the original racists because they think they're the chosen people. I've been lovingly called kike, which I obviously did not particularly enjoy. It didn't really always feel like a safe place to be, but because people had this perception of us as these very privileged students, which in many cases we were, it didn't feel taken seriously. And if I were to tell someone, please don't call me that, please don't say that to me, it'd be treated as a kind of oversensitivity. Whereas for me, especially coming from my family background, that's violent language, you know. And I guess lastly, I would add that in my senior year of college, that was the first year of the Trump administration, which felt like anti-Semitism coming just from a broader political context. Not that it hadn't been there before, but just really emboldened. And that was a really tough time. And it also felt hard to feel like our concerns, for the many people who were concerned about all the minority groups affected by the rise of, not the rise, but the hardening of white supremacy in America. We felt like an afterthought, if we were a thought at all. So yeah, that was my experience.
At the end of the last semester, I put aside my academic field, and I'm now working on a book which is going to be a memoir on my experience with campus anti-Semitism. It began at a community college of 30,000 students, 90% of whom were students of color, 90% of the faculty administration were white, and one of my white non-Jewish colleagues excitedly told me that 6 of her colleagues were going to have 100 students, none of whom were going to be Jewish, have their Holocaust education lesson be an episode of the Jerry Springer Show created on campus by bringing in a right-wing Jewish activist who had been designated, or at least his organization, designated by the FBI as a domestic terrorist organization. And they were not going to tell this individual that the invitation was actually to make him a clown in front of the students to learn about the Holocaust. So when I offered quiet concern, and as the only Jewish studies trained professor in the university, I'll go bring you somebody who can actually do this, I was accused of violating academic freedom, free speech, and it unwound what became a 3-year fight that reached the United States Commission on Civil Rights, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and I was tenured actually at that point. They fired my dean, who wasn't tenured, for having supported me. The individual they invited was given op-ed space in the campus newspaper, and it got coverage through LA Times and beyond. And in it, he called me a self-hating leftist Jew. And that epithet sort of stuck on that campus because that's how they could kind of figure why it was I would be protesting this kind of treatment of Holocaust studies. Ultimately, threats of violence were made against me, and I resigned my tenure and took the job at my current university, San Francisco State, which is a very leftist progressive university where I thought perhaps this self-hating leftist Jew would find his people. I will tell you that I packed up my boxes as a self-hating leftist Jew. When I got to my new office at SF State and unpacked the boxes, I learned I was a right-wing Zionist colonialist. And Kettleman City is halfway between the two cities, and I know it didn't transform my politics. So the month of July was a rather magical month, and the book is going to unwind what it is to be Jewish on a college campus when you're in a right-wing place and then in a left-wing place, and how the perceptions of me are not actually me. The subtext is race, class, and gender. Because at the right-wing university, with 90% students of color, when this happened, African American, Latino, and women faculty reached out to me with such humanity and love and support, quietly sharing their stories of their version, and they had my back through the 3 years. And I, in fact, did not resign until I could make sure they were all covered. Like, we had this deal, and I kind of felt that having had 3 years of that immersion and understanding otherness and what my mentor at the time called invisibility, that would be my launching pad at my leftist university. I've been there 19 years and have rarely ever spoken to colleagues of color because I am, as a Jewish studies professor, seen as a Zionist, And we're in a campus where there's anti-normalization, which is folks will not interact, and the racial separations around perceived notions of victimhood have been isolating. So the irony of my story is I felt most in solidarity at a right-wing, white-powered institution, and least connected to social justice at the place where it was supposed to be. So I'm trying to work that out in a few hundred pages.
As I have said several times during this very important experience that we've all shared, I've been a professor for 45 years, and it gives you, at the same school, and I am the professor that has the greatest longevity at my university, which is a very large university in the city of Chicago. It is officially designated the most diverse university in the Midwest, and it is. And I have seen over the 45 years it not being an issue to beginning in 2005 and continuing in intensity, a very serious issue. It has been a serious issue for our Jewish faculty, for our faculty that identifies personally with a strong commitment irrespective of denomination, of being Jewish, and it has been an eye-opener. What I would like to speak about is that Chicago is a wonderful city, and among its strengths is its strong university community. At the one end in Evanston, we have Northwestern. At the other end in Hyde Park, we have the University of Chicago. And in the middle, we have a huge plethora of wonderful religious universities, secular state universities, and very, very strong community colleges. And we have experienced as a university community what has already been discussed. So I would like to share with you approaches that I recommend. Recommend in the sense of how much that I got to learn in these 2 weeks and hear from you over the last 2 weeks. And I take, in my lifetime, a very structural response to what can be personal pain. So firstly, I come from a political science department that I cherish. It is a group of people. I am the oldest, and they are very, very young, and they are wonderful. They come from all backgrounds. And what was repeated 3 times to us during the last 2 weeks is try to create support at the middle, at the person in Yiddish that we would call pariv, not here, not to the left, not to the right, but in the middle and with no axe to grind. And how would I do that? So I too am a member of the American Jewish Committee. I'm on the board, and they have an amazing program called Project Interchange, in which we can nominate members of our department to go to Israel for 2 weeks and to spend enormous time with the same area of study that the people are in. And we're looking for those people who are young enough to vote on our school's committees, faculty senate, etc., that have no animus but could use this experience as a knowledge-serving one. Well, this has worked brilliantly. And so again, I want to emphasize it's Project Interchange. You can, as was mentioned by Saba, we have 22 offices, and it doesn't matter what your religion is or background, but if you are concerned with this problem, you have the opportunity to expand that group that has not been acerbically impacted in this political dilemma that we are in. And again, when I was personally impacted by the BDS movement, and most of all, the postmodernism on the campus is extensive among the faculty, the level of support from my department and from the heads of the graduate school was absolutely stellar. It is something that, it is just a wonderful thing. Second thing, another structure.
Can I ask you, can you explain more of your personal experience?
Yes. It's a little bit painful.
I know, if you're comfortable.
Sure.
Only if you're comfortable.
Thank you. Without getting into the details, I applied for a sabbatical to do the research which was recently published. I hope you will all read it. And our laws at the school say that there will be 21 people each term to get sabbatical, and if more than 21 apply, based on your seniority, you get bumped up to the top of the list. 45 years. I was rejected for a sabbatical. I had not had a sabbatical for 38 years. 38 years ago, I took a sabbatical with the passing of my mother, and that was it. And it was horrific. And again, I'm an active member of the union, and what I quickly understood is that this was about being a very strong Zionist and being a person that is committed in a variety of ways that does not share postmodernism and all of its underlying assumptions. I set a grievance. We had to submit all our paperwork in October. It was coming to the end of the term, and there was no response at all. And at that point, I knew what I was faced with. It was extremely shocking and painful, but it was no different than my colleagues have experienced throughout the Midwest, throughout the great state of Illinois, but we are organized on this. And one of the things that happened is that, was that sufficient? Okay. And one of the things that happened is that I really stuck to my gun. I mean, really, as you know, I'm not a shrinking violet. They discovered that. And I was very, very, very strong. And they had to create a separate category for me for a one-time case that would get a sabbatical. Thank you very much. I took it. And please read my research because I worked very hard to get it. So the second thing I want you to understand is that our Jewish Federation has been unbelievably supportive, not only of Jewish faculty, but of faculty who have had a very difficult time not being hired, and they went to the Federation to see if there was a bias. They created an institute for us. It met twice a month. We started it over 12 years ago, and we're still meeting. And of particular import, everyone from Northwestern, the Jewish faculty experienced, plus intimidation, plus members of not calling them, returning their calls, not publishing. We know the litany of events. But there were two Christians who came to us that on their resumes, and they did magnificent PhD work, it said literacy in Hebrew. And they were sending in resumes and left and right being rejected. It was a heartbreaking response of the faculty. Take off literacy in Hebrew and see if you get the interviews, and they did. Yeah. So this happened to Christians who were experienced in their resumes. Lastly, I would like to also give you 2 examples of looking at structural things that we can do. The president of the University of Chicago is a fantastic human being. His name is President Zimmerman. He is very, very much, all his life, a committed Zionist. But there had been very real problems at the University of Chicago, and he had to figure out a way of academically doing something extremely important. And he created an unbelievable institute on the study of water resources and the environment worldwide, and has been able to raise millions to fund this. And of course, the basis of the faculty are faculty from Israel who come in to teach this, and the cross-cultural work has been magnificent. My last example is by Professor Eli Rekis. You may know him if you're a faculty member, the head of Israeli Studies at Northwestern. He came 15 years ago to head the Israeli Studies at Northwestern. He is a brilliant, wonderful scholar, just great, and people lined up to take his course. 2005, BDS comes in, and the dwindling number of students who wouldn't go near anything with Israel results in the number of people applying to his wonderful program begins to shrink. Says to himself, this is important, the writing is on the wall, and he takes a walk, and he goes over first to the engineering school at Northwestern, then to the chemistry department, then to information technology, and he discovered no animus, no postmodernism, and that among the science community, he created a brand new Israel Studies program, which within a few days, they filled the enrollment. It tells us something very important about niches within the university community. Need I say more? The program is a budding program, doing fantastic work. And so, my message is, you have to be strong, you have to be courageous, you have to speak up, and you have to have structural backing of supportive human beings who will work with you, and also a psychological support group. As we heard from David Hirsch, a wonderful scholar, and Ella and all of the rest on the Corbin situation, their mental health has suffered. Aloneness, not feeling supported on this, on your campus. Don't let it happen. Call us, contact us. Don't lose contact with any of us. We're here for you. And in conclusion, I would like to say is that I will be leaving tomorrow morning at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you so very, very much for what has been accomplished. But to thank all of you. It has been an absolute delight and pleasure. As I said, there wasn't one clucker in the bunch. And what a divine experience. So we salute you, and may our paths cross forever. Thank you so much.
I'm a junior at the George Washington University, majoring in Judaic Studies and Africana Studies. And George Washington University, being in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States of America, is an extremely politicized environment. So one would expect that leaning into discomfort is something normal, that every student is used to. And I would say in most cases, that's the truth. Students know they have the ability to have intellectual discussions regarding politics within the divisive Republican, Democrat, left, right, liberal, conservative divide. But one thing that I've noticed is that anti-Semitism doesn't abide by those lines. It doesn't abide by the lines that are drawn out in the political field. It crosses over and it manifests itself in many different ways on our campus. Specifically, the ways that I would say and I would notice are elements of willful ignorance and elements of cultural erasure, as well as elements of cultural appropriation that I'm going to get into more. So as far as the willful ignorance goes, I think oftentimes I have interactions with students who are not members of any community that has direct ties to the conflict. And many of these conversations are ideologically based and very theoretical, but not necessarily taking into context or taking into understanding the historical context of the situation. So oftentimes I hear quotes from people who are against the state of Israel existing, not policies, but existing. And their excuse for why that's not anti-Semitic is because they claim they don't believe in colonialist, settler colonialist ethno-states. Now, on paper, it sounds like, okay, that's a rather progressive position, until you understand that this is coming from people who are not members of communities that have been exiles from nation after nation, continent after continent, who have an ethnic and cultural connection to a homeland that has been forcibly erased for generations, and therefore these people have a right to their homeland as outlined in the United Nations. Now, that's something that I think is extremely problematic on our campus, and it's not just the ignorance, it's not just the innocence, because I've been able to have conversation after conversation with people to explain the ways that Jews do deserve the right to have self-determination in our homeland, and that's not something we're going to compromise, and that's not something any other group around the world should compromise. But there's a choice to ignore Jewish history and to apply Eurocentric definitions of ethnicity and religion to a Middle Eastern group as Jews who don't, fall into the definitions and therefore are at the mercy of whatever tagline these people can use, whether they're on the left or the right, because it's coming from both. Now, that kind of ties into the idea of cultural erasure. Oftentimes on campus, I'm, as a member of GW for Israel, the Zionist group on campus, our only platform is that we're Zionists. We believe in Jewish right for self-determination. We're an independent organization, not affiliated with any larger movement, and if you're on the left, you're on the right, it doesn't matter, come, have discussions. But oftentimes we're told that we're white settler colonialists, which is actually, I laugh at it, as a black man with an afro, with our president, who actually went to the same school as her in San Diego, and she's Mexican Jewish with Syrian origins. And we have a bunch of Israeli students, people from all over the spectrum who are part of our group. Yet the individuals who are classifying us are oftentimes white Americans who have no connection to any sort of minority group that they claim that we are oppressing. So that's something that I laugh a bit until I realize that it's dangerous, because that type of rhetoric spreads. So in order to counteract that, what we've been working on doing is highlighting our cultural histories and highlighting the fact that the Jewish people have our connection to our homeland. And Israel is not just a state, it's a nation. And when I say nation, I'm talking about a group of people. And we all have different backgrounds. We all bring them, but we all share a single connection to Israel, to the nation, and to the land. Furthermore, coming to cultural appropriation, that's another buzzword that's used often. Actually, I've been attacked for cultural appropriation for celebrating elements of Jewish culture. After I released my song, I got hundreds of comments saying that now I'm stealing falafel and shawarma, because I guess that's the biggest issue people have to worry about talking about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, is some falafel and shawarma. That being said, I think that it's actually a reverse, because what I've witnessed is so many different groups and individuals who are using other people's narratives and cultures to try and politicize Jews' connection to our homeland, and use it to target other groups and use it to target us. Specifically, I've heard people on the right try and cite the way that Israel dealt with the Second Intifada and built the security barrier, and say, Israel did it, it worked for them, so we need to build a wall on the southern border. For me, I grew up in San Diego for most of my life. Never once was there a suicide bomber from Mexico who came and attacked San Diego. We're not dealing with the same threat, it's not the same situation, so I'll correct someone on the right and say, stop trying to use an issue that's deeply affected me and so many of my friends who are victims of terrorism to try and advance your political agenda. Then, with the same issue, you get people on the left who are saying, oh, look, Israel is just like people on the right in the United States because they went and built a wall. I mean, if you're anti, building a wall on the southern border, you should be anti-Israel. And then again, that's the same response. I have to clarify, it's not the same situation. I grew up on the southern border, never once was there an attack, but I have friends in Israel who grew up, and it was a completely different situation. And that's an element of a way something that's Jewish and it's an issue related to Israel is used to attack just as a tool, I'd say as a bargaining chip, as a poker chip in a game of how to defeat the other political opponent in America. But another thing that I've noticed, and I'll quickly conclude with this, is the way that other narratives and other groups struggles rather, have been used to attack the Jewish community. So freshman year, my first year at college, BDS was coming up on campus, and I was having a conversation after an event with a student who's a member of Students for Justice for Palestine. A very calm conversation, because he was consistently interrupting our speaker, which I found extremely disrespectful. So after the fact, I wanted to actually have a conversation with him. And I brought up the fact, I asked him, because he's throwing out buzzwords trying to say that struggles in Israel are the exact parallels of struggles of black people in the United States. Keep in mind, this is not a black student, nor a Jewish student. I don't know what authority he has to speak on this, but he believed he had some authority to speak on this. I asked him, what is your opinion on the way that black people are treated in Gaza and the West Bank, many of whom do share a history of enslavement and who are descendants of the Arab slave trade the same way my family is descendants of the European slave trade? His response was, I don't really know much about that, and to be honest, I don't talk about it because it's not convenient. So for me to hear that a non-black, non-Jewish student, not a member of any of these communities, believes that something that's deeply affected so many people, where black people have told their stories of being in Gaza or being in the West Bank, where they're referred to as abid, which is a racialized slur that means slave. You know, as someone who's been called the N-word, as someone who's been called a variety of racial slurs, to hear that no one is gonna highlight that struggle because it's not convenient and doesn't fit into that narrative was extremely offensive to me. So I tried to explain this to him, and I told him, my struggle is not a bargaining chip for you to use. I 100% support black Israelis, Ethiopian Israelis' struggles for justice and to get rid of discrimination, as I know many other Israelis do. That's part of being part of the nation of Israel. I completely support the struggles of my people in the United States, in North America, throughout the world, struggling for justice, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in the West Bank, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Libya. But to hear that someone is just going to ignore that and is so blatant to say that they don't talk about it because it's not convenient, and then they have the nerve to the next week when the BDS hearing comes in line to question me and start asking me what I think about Black Lives Matter, when they clearly don't care about Black lives unless they fit into their own political agenda, was extremely problematic. And what was more problematic was when I tried to explain this to him, rather than having a conversation, he said, you know, I'm not getting anywhere with you, so I'm going to leave. So I think that goes to show how this anti-Semitism and appropriation of other narratives to attack Jews in Israel and appropriation of issues going on in Israel and things that affect the Jewish people are used to attack other political opponents kind of shows that for many people on campus, they either have an ignorance of Jewish history, of Jewish culture, and they don't necessarily understand that we're not just political bargaining chips, and we actually are still alive. We've survived the Holocaust, we've survived the Farhud, we've survived the explosions, and these are elements of our history that we're living with and that affected us. So we need to be able to speak for ourselves and not just have other people use us for their narratives.
Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to make one quick comment, and I'm going to, I guess, pose a question to you guys. So picking up what Noah said, you know, it's amazing. And I think also what Jonathan said earlier this morning in his lecture, Spire. You know, there's always been Jews in Israel, I guess, since the time of Moses and even before. So the Jews have a historical presence in the land. The Torah, the Bible speaks of it. The New Testament speaks of it. The Quran speaks of it. Our history books speak of it. And it's interesting that these epithets are being directed at the Jewish people. You know, what gives the right of Europeans to live in the Americas? What gives them the right to live in New Zealand and Australia and Canada and the United States? Our country was, you know, adopted by international law, the United Nations, the League of Nations, the British government, and all these biblical sources. And yet, you know, our identity is always in question, and nobody questions, you know, people living in New England. Interesting. So, whose land was that? And how did that happen? So, you know, interesting. So It's just a thought. The question I have for you is this. Most of you are from the United States, one European, well, and Persian American. So here's the question. You know, I grew up in a time, I was part of the anti-apartheid movement, I was part of the student struggle for Soviet Jewry. And in a way, Americans, the Jewish Americans, by and large, there was discrimination in the United States and there was discrimination in Canada. We couldn't get into certain golf clubs, we weren't allowed to go to certain universities and schools. We couldn't live in certain areas. But that, over time, passed. And I think the civil rights movement kind of opened up doors for the Jewish community as well as the American community, and maybe even more so for the Jewish community in an interesting way. So these barriers were largely defeated in the 60s and 70s for the Jewish population. But the Jewish population, for human rights, we fought for Soviet Jews. We fought to help our brothers and sisters in the Middle East and Israel to sustain themselves when the economy was terrible and Israel was under siege. So the Jewish community was very active in the anti-apartheid movement and human rights issues. We never really had to confront, I would say, a very serious anti-Semitic moment. And it seems like there's the BDS movement on campus. The BDS movement is now coming to Congress. Right. Anti-Semitic discourse is in the media of record, the New York Times, CNN, Fox News. It's part of our discourse now. So how can the Jewish community deal with anti-Semitism in our own society? How do we deal with it? I was speaking earlier to President Rome, and we were talking about maybe the African American leadership, people who were active in the 1950s and 60s in the civil rights struggle in the African American community. Maybe we need a workshop. Maybe we need, because in a sense, I think the Jewish community, I find, in my humble opinion, we're a little bit like deer in the headlights. We don't know what to do. Who's the enemy? When is criticism of Israel legitimate and when does it cross the line into anti-Semitism? Is it okay that the BDS exists on campus and the Muslim Brotherhood is active on university campuses when they are a genocidal anti-Semitic movement that's using Nazi ideology and it's accepted by the progressive left? Imagine the progressive left in 2019 in bed with those espousing Nazi ideology. So as a community, how do we deal with this? What do we do? As intellectuals, as students on the front line, because the universities are now the front line, how do we handle this challenge?
I'll get us kicked off here. I object to the study of anti-Semitism as a part of the Department of Jewish Studies. I'll just drop that.
We intentionally don't go there, right? We agree.
Now I'm going to go there. Because anti-Semitism is not the story of the Jews, it's the story against the Jews. The idea that my discipline, which is supposed to see the world through Jewish lenses, is going to offer courses to see the world through Nazi lenses, undermines the whole essence and purpose of any of these ethnic studies groups that we have. So I believe the burden of anti-Semitism is not the Jews' burden, it's everyone's burden. In the same way that racism is not the burden of African Americans, because the existence of racism undermines our collective community, and therefore everyone needs to own it, and sexism, and Islamophobia, and. So to stay away from the victimization Olympics thing that we've had, and to draw into allies, and to have a common vision, I'd like to break down the boundaries of the isms, even as I, of course, respect and appreciate the differences.
So I'm going to push back. That's beautiful. And you're right, morally, ethically beautiful. But in realpolitik, it really doesn't happen much. I mean, there were coalitions fighting the civil rights, but when push came to shove, who really pulled their weight? Who really pushed the civil rights movement? And I would say it was an element in the African American community with some support here and there. So how do we as a community confront this?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm also doing Jewish studies. Obviously, I'm just a bachelor's student, but I do see that it's very important, I think, to actually learn about Judaism, to learn about anti-Semitism. So that's definitely one thing. But in terms of community, I work a lot with community spaces, and one thing that I've realized, especially in Europe, is that as anti-Semitism rises, we really tend to close ourselves up. And it's very, very clear when you look at community centers, synagogues, it's getting much more difficult to enter the synagogues, both physically and, I guess, figuratively. Just it's really a struggle as anyone, just Jewish, non-Jewish. You just feel like you're not as welcome or not as part of a community, and I think that's exactly what they want anti-Semitism to do to the Jewish community. So I think, especially as the younger generation comes in, it's really our duty to make sure that the spaces that we create are really inclusive, both to Jews and non-Jews, and that we don't use just politics to fight anti-Semitism, because I'm not necessarily the most political person, but obviously Israel is always in the conversation. But I do think that there's much softer ways to both create the spaces that are inclusive and also to address the issue in a way that feels much more, I guess, accepting and much more open to discussion, and also to target those people that are in between. So that's really something that I think we should do a lot better. We're always trying to go to the ones that are fighting directly against us and telling us things and, for example, shutting us down. But I think it's much more successful as a strategy sometimes to go in the ones that are in between, that maybe they're not sure, that just go with the flow a little bit. And there's many of those people. And personally, sometimes I think just simple conversations on campus or outside or at work, they really make a huge difference. And I've been bringing so many people with me. I go to the synagogue and they're interested, I'm just like, sure, just come by. And then when I go, they can't get in because of security reasons. And as much as I understand those concerns, obviously, I do think that there is a way that we can maintain those spaces to be inclusive and so that people can really learn about Judaism and why it's so important and why this minority, especially in Europe, has been here for so long, and we're shutting down spaces that are part of actually our country's culture, not just of Jewish culture. And I speak as someone from Rome who's been there for a while, I guess. I mean, I don't live in Rome, but the Jewish community in Rome has been there for so long that it's such a huge part of that city. It's very sad to see that we're closing ourselves down to the opportunity to really show how Judaism has been part of Rome, of Italy, and of Europe. And so I think that would be my strategy, I would say.
Just a very quick comment then, Sarah. It's interesting for you guys to know that the level of security in European Jewish communities is really astounding. In synagogues, community centers, schools, it's very tight. And interestingly, in the American Jewish communities now, there's sort of the American response. People going to synagogue are basically packing. There's several people in a synagogue now, and when they pray, they're carrying guns and they're running. So that's the American response, and that's now become quietly and unofficially a new normal. So Sarah.
Actually, the comment I have to make responds directly to that in some way. I want to speak directly to the topic of the Black-Jewish Alliance, which is the wording a lot of people have used, or at least that's what I use. Tell me if you don't like it. We've talked a lot here at this conference about holding Jews to a different standard than other people, and I think there's danger in portraying Jews as the best allies in the world who have done everything great. And there's danger in portraying Jews as part of the problem, colonizers, white colonizers. We are, as all people, imperfect allies, and we need to be better. And I think it's going to be hard as we stress the importance of our allies being there for us. That is going to be difficult unless we are actively there for those allies that we hope to show up for us. That means acknowledging the role of Jews in a lot of liberating civil rights movements, etc., but also acknowledging the complicity of a lot of American Jews. This is a very Americentric comment, but the complicity of a lot of Jews in white supremacy and the oppression of other groups. And that goes across a lot of different political lines and spectra. I don't say this because I'm self-bashing. It's not because I'm a leftist self-hating Jew, as my friend to the right might be. I say that because if we're going to expect better of ourselves, we need that radical honesty. And we need that honesty with our allies, because without that honesty, it's not going to happen. And I don't want a situation where our allies, particularly in the Black community, show up for us, and the next day when they need us, there's radio silence. And I unfortunately think that that happens more often than it should, to put it lightly. One element of that, I was talking to some other people, particularly in the Wiesel King program, the students at this conference, about our visit to the CST security, I guess, center company. And there were concerns about what increasing security in the interest of protecting Jewish lives does for other people. The whole idea of someone having a gun in a synagogue not only makes me deeply uncomfortable, but makes me worry about the vigilante justice we're willing to bring into our community, almost definitely at the expense of others. What does a suspicious person outside of a synagogue look like? So that was just a small point, but I think that ties to the issue that you were discussing.
Before Noah, please. Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what you said. But I think we also have to be very, exact when we say white supremacy, because if you say Jews and white supremacy, I'm not exactly sure what you were referring to, but I think there's a vast history that is preeminently clear when it comes to white supremacy and Jews, or white supremacy and the other. Tragically, and really tragically, and at a profound level, the extermination of a race was going on. That's white supremacy. So I don't know what you, yeah, please, sure.
When I say white supremacy, I don't mean white supremacy as a radical political movement. I mean entrenched systemic white supremacy that gives out political privilege, economic privilege, that white Jews have gladly participated in, and in a lot of cases left other people behind.
Fair enough. Thanks for the clarification.
Can we call them white Jews? Can we say Ashkenazi Sephardi? Because that's what people throw at us.
Yeah.
So,
Ashkenazi Jews.
yes, I'm not even saying specifically you, but just that whole idea of
See,
white Jews.
and I think, so this is very interesting. And I know Noah wants to say something. We're running out of time, so I'll be brief. We have 7 minutes. So this is a very American contemporary moment right here. And I think we need to be very careful, and I think we need to be, now as scholars, we have to really put this into perspective. In terms of the European experience with the Jews, and Ashkenazi Jews, they were never considered to be white. They were never considered to be fully human. They were, now we're in day 11 of a program on anti-Semitism, when the dominant perspective of perceiving the other was Christianity in this in this very space, on this very continent, right? Jews were not considered to be human. Full stop. Period. When Enlightenment happened, I know what you're saying. When Enlightenment happened, and Jews were beginning to be enfranchised, the backlash, the dominant way of perceiving reality was based on race, and Jews were exterminated and excluded, or excluded and exterminated, because they were not white. Now, in a very specific moment, in a very specific society, and I'm speaking only about the United States of America, and the United States of America, ladies and gentlemen, is one country, it's one part of the world, and it's not the globe. And there's a serious tendency. Thank you for saying Thank you. No, and I think, my brother from South Africa, I grew up in Canada, and in Canada today, the identity of Jewish people, the Jewish community, just across the border, in a very similar society, same colonial legacy, same extermination of the indigenous people, right? slavery, African Americans who escaped from the United States into Canada from the Northern Star and the Underground Railroad, 80% of African Americans would return to the United States of America within a 6-month period and risk becoming slaves again and staying in British-dominated Canada. That's liberal Canada. Liberal Canada created the Bantustans, which became the foundation of the apartheid system. That's a Canadian invention. So even though we're a multicultural, egalitarian society, we still treat the First Nations in the most pernicious way in fourth world conditions. But across the border, Jews don't identify as white. In this generation, and in say the last 20 or 30 years, there's become something that's happening in the American Jewish community, not in the Canadian Jewish community, and not in the European Jewish community, and not in the South American Jewish communities, and not in the Middle Eastern, nowhere else in the world. So we have to be very careful, and this is a tendency that really irks me. In many conversations when it comes to Israel, when it comes to Jews, because of the dominance of the American position in global affairs and academic affairs, and given the legacy of racism in the United States, which persists to this day and takes on various forms, and it's evolved in a way, in some ways, there's this kind of blind spot, in my humble opinion, where the gaze of the world is through the prism of the racialized American experience. And the world, in my humble opinion, is different and more complex than the gaze of the American experience. And I find too often the discourse of who's a Jew, of who's an Israeli. The Ashkenazi Jews are white, really? That's that's historically incorrect and foreign to Jewish perspective. Jewish identity has nothing to do with the American perspective in Europe, and certainly in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Iraq and Syria and Persia. Jews did not have that American identity. So as scholars and as intellectuals, please, put things into context. It's very important. No.
So I think going off of that, and also addressing the question of how we can actually defeat this kind of anti-Semitism that's growing. I think the biggest issue that we have and that we're currently facing is that we've lost the ability and the autonomy, rather, to self-define. Mm-hmm. And that includes looking at the narratives and building these alliances. So we need to look at, I'm going to tell a quick story, I'll be brief. So my father came from the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, he's not white, he's not Russian, he's Jewish. They make sure you know that.
Absolutely right.
When he got to the United States, he's still, he's not like us, he's weird, he's an immigrant, doesn't speak the language. Then moves to a different place, and he's white, but then gets stationed somewhere else in the military, where one of his higher-ranking officers tells him, I'm not going to let you succeed because we don't like your kind. Now that is a real story of something, of a very common Jewish experience, whether Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, Sephardi, within the United States, where Jews are ethno-convenienced in a way, where someone places an ethnic identity on someone else for whatever's convenient to their narrative. So if someone wants to identify them as an outsider in their position, they might define them as white, or they might define them as not white enough. And I think that the ability to self-define ourselves as we're Jewish, we're not going to abide by the Eurocentric, or rather very American-centric constructs of race, will help us grapple with our identity and return to our roots. And that doesn't mean, I think that's also really important to address, something that my dad has addressed. My dad is an Ashkenazi Jew. He's not white, that's not his context. That being said, it's very easy for him to understand, having 4 black children and a black wife, that he is going to have more privilege in many cases than them in the United States. And that's not something that is going to say that it's erasing his Ashkenazi identity. It's not something that's going to erase the discriminatory experiences he's had, but it does put that into context that, this is a spectrum. It's not just someone's white or they're not, because once we adopt that, we lose the ability to self-define, we lose the ability to relate to other groups, and I think that that's the biggest issue. And when it comes to building these alliances, we need to recognize that the reason we succeeded so well during the civil rights movement is because we went into situations, we claimed our identities unapologetically. Black Americans, we said, this is who we are, we deserve these rights the same as everyone else, and we're going to fight for them, period. We had Jewish Americans who said, we've had similar experiences out of this country. We have some similar experiences within this country. And you know what? I support civil rights, And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna fight for civil rights for my brothers and sisters. And that was something that was extremely powerful. And it didn't matter if they supported Israel, because they weren't allowing other people to define the conversation at all. So we went into places, we said we're Zionists. We support Israel because we have a right to have our homeland, and for that reason we're also going to support civil rights. So what we need to do now is we need to be comfortable understanding that it's up to us to define ourselves. I've had experiences where I've gone into a place and I've been overwhelmingly welcomed, but I've gotten one comment from someone, who says, "Oh, you're Jewish, what do you think about Israel?" I know a lot of people who that single comment is going to outweigh all the other positive experiences they have and define their experience and define their ability to get involved in whatever struggle they're trying to as an ally. We need to regain our confidence, reclaim our ability to self-define, and by doing that, we're going to be able to participate in these movements unapologetically, and people will respect that.
On that note of wisdom, it's a good place to end. So thank you, Noah. Thank you, everybody on the panel. Thanks for listening. We have tea, and then the next session, I hope Carlton will be here. I'll be around. If anybody has questions, Carlton's here. Cool. So Carlton and I will be here. If you guys have any questions about your projects or your curriculum development, we'll be here hanging out. It's also a good time if you want to work on your projects or curriculum, feel free. But we'll have like an informal session. You're very welcome to engage Carlton and I starting at 4:30. So enjoy the tea and see you soon.